Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our next speakers, Sheryl, Benedict, and Daniel Nguyen. Sheryl is an alumna from Cal Poly Pomona and has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity. She is currently a manager at LBMC Information Security and holds several certifications. Daniel Nguyen is a lead security consultant at LBMC as well and holds both the OSCP and GWAPT certifications. He specializes in various types of technical assessments such as web application, internal and external penetration tests, physical security assessments, and many more. So today, Sheryl and Daniel will be sharing their tales from a hacker and qualified security assessor perspective. And with that, I will let them take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Angela. Daniel, if you want to, you can go ahead and do screen share.
Give me 1 second.
Sure. All right, good, either way.
Actually, yeah, you might have to because I'm having trouble accessing my other monitor.
No problem. Bear with us. All right, let us know if the presentation is coming across your side.
Looks good. I think you'll just have to click on presenter and we should be good to go.
Okay, great. I just wanted to double check technology, make sure it's working. Okay. Here we go. The agenda today is just to cover a background of the sorry about that. The hacker and QSA stories from lessons learned from a year of compromises. And I don't know why this is automatically scrolling through. This is interesting. Okay. Go for next here. So I want to give everybody just a background of our experience, and Angela had already kind of gone through this briefly here. So again, like I mentioned, I'm a manager at LBMC Information Security. I'm a Cal Poly Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Systems with the Application Software Development track. I had graduated in 2002. So just to let you know on that. I have over 15 years of experience in information security and compliance, and have performed various assessments, testing various types of compliance efforts with PCI data security standard, SOC reporting, Sarbanes-Oxley, the Japanese JSOX requirements, HIPAA security risk assessments, ACAB, which is a Death Master file, IT internal controls, business process controls, and e-discovery computer forensics for various organizations, including the Fortune 500 global organizations. So I do hold several certifications, as well as you can see here.
All right, thanks, Sheryl. So as people said, I am Daniel Nguyen. I work at LBMC as a lead security consultant. I primarily work with penetration tests. My background's a bit strange. I started off as a cancer research biologist, decided that wasn't the life for me. Wandered around for a bit, heard about the OSCP certification, kind of dived headfirst into it without doing too much research. Turns out that it was supposed to be hard, which for me, I just thought it was hard because I didn't know anything. Ended up passing it, got hired as a pen tester here, and I've been working at LBMC ever since. I primarily work focusing on currently with stealthy techniques such as living off the land, leveraging open source intelligence, abusing misconfigurations over technical vulnerabilities. But when I first started off, due to my lack of tech background, I hadn't actually I don't have experience with the with IT as a lot of my colleagues do, and because of that, I wasn't as strong in the technical aspect as everyone else. So instead, I leveraged my understanding of people, and although my technical skills have since been brought up to par, I think for me at least, I focus more on exploiting human behavior than the actual technical vulnerabilities that a lot of people think of when they think of penetration tests. All right, next slide, please.
Should be coming through. Hold on, try again. There we go.
All right, thank you. So a bit about us. We talk about why human behavior. Uh, we think that it's a great twofold approach. For clients, it helps assess the compliance to information security frameworks. If you're familiar with some of those frameworks, a lot of the controls focus on trying to mitigate risks from human behavior just as much as it does technical vulnerabilities. The focus on human behavior also assesses the effectiveness of your current policies, stuff like password policies, for example. Everyone's familiar with typical 8-character passwords, uppercase, lowercase numbers, special characters, but controls like that don't always account for user behavior that can greatly weaken those controls. For example, we get really great luck with, see, this is March, so winter 2021 exclamation mark or spring 2021 exclamation mark. I guarantee you, if a company has those password policies and there's 500 users, there would be at least 12 to 20 users using those passwords. It really shows how human behavior really introduces an element of risk that these policies might not account for. And of course, a lot of companies these days use vulnerability scanners such as Nessus, but those vulnerability scanners only account for technical vulnerabilities. They don't really look at the risks from the people themselves. And as for providers such as myself, I found that focusing on human behavior helps differentiate myself from the competition, where a lot of pen testers focus primarily on the technical aspect. By coming in from a different perspective, you're providing clients a different POV as well, and you provide much more value. And at the same time, making yourself differentiating yourself from everyone else. And for people like me who work in offensive security specifically, by focusing on human behavior, you could find additional attack vectors that I will talk about later that would bypass otherwise strong technical controls. So the first thing we're going to talk about is target profiling. So target profiling is trying to understand who you attack. When you focus on the people themselves, you could help better direct your attacks. You could ensure your attacks would be more successful, more efficient. Generally, you're going to draw a lot of generalizations, a lot of educated guesswork. So even though it's not always accurate, it's not a science. When you become more experienced, if you know what to look for, when you get better with target profiling, you'll find that your target success rate with attacks such as social engineering phone calls, such as phishing attacks, become much more successful. Some of the factors that I take into account when I profile my targets include field or industry. For example, healthcare workers are very vigilant about PHI. So if I come in with an attack trying to bring up patient information, I know it's very likely not going to work, because the second I mention anything related to PHI, they're going to be immediately on guard. Whereas if I come in with a different approach, it might not raise the same alarms that with that PHI normally would. Similarly, job role, what you do in your company can affect what level of access you have, what your level of acceptability. Personally, I like focusing on developers, because I found that developers have that great perfect middle ground of a lot of privileged access, but their work introduces some potentially insecure configurations, primarily in development environments, whereas some other jobs, they might be easier to exploit, but they might not have the same level of potential access that developers would. Other factors include behaviors or personality traits that you might get from social media, or just even if you've ever gotten to talk to them before. And of course, company culture. The way I would attack a Fortune 500 company is completely different from how I would attack a local tech startup with 20 users. All right. So we're going to start going through a lot of different aspects of exploring human behavior, and we're going to have case studies for each. So in this specific case study for target profiling, the client in question was a PCI pen test client. So Sheryl will be able to talk more about the PCI aspect as a QSA herself. But as a pen tester, what I'm trying to do is access a special a special subnet within a network called the Card Data Environment, or CDE. And for PCI compliance purposes, any machine that touches or transmits or stores credit card data has to be put into the CDE, and the CDE has to be segmented from the rest of the internal network. So even though you might be on the same corporate internal network, you should not be able to access the CDE unless you go through the appropriate channels. So as an attacker, if I could breach a CDE, that's a huge deal, and that would be a major finding for PCI compliance. Excuse me. So in this specific case, I started off on the external pen test on the public internet. I found that a lot of their corporate infrastructure was protected by MFA. So I was not able to get through that. But I found that some of their developers were using Confluence and Jira hosted on Atlassian themselves rather than on company servers. And these third-party services were not tied into the corporate infrastructure. As a result, they weren't tied into the MFA that the rest of their corporate external network uses. So while I was able to compromise accounts, and while MFA was able to block my access to email and to the VPN, because Atlassian was not protected by the same corporate controls, I was able to use those compromised credentials and jump straight into Jira and Confluence. And while I was in those pages, I found there was a developer who had posted up his bash shell history, and one line in that file of maybe 1,000 different commands, there was one section where he was trying to SSH into a computer, and he copied and pasted his credentials too quickly before the SH prompt went up. And what happened was he actually just pasted his password into the shell, and it was logged into the history file, and no one noticed it until I came along. Fast forward to the internal pen test, I managed to chain SH tunnels between 3 different servers to breach the CDE. And I found that the password that he had logged in the history file was actually a reused root password for every Linux server on the CDE. So by profiling my targets, by picking out developer accounts, and by being vigilant, looking through that 1,000 line file manually, I found that one password that gave me full control of the entire CDE, where I could have compromised everyone's credit card data being transmitted through that network. And this highlights the need for comprehensive MFA protection, and for companies to just really know what services you're using, rather than what and compare that against this list of services you think you're using.
Great points, Daniel. So next, I just wanted to kind of look at it from a compliance perspective. As far as the target profiling, of course, what Daniel was kind of describing in simplest terms is looking at reconnaissance and footprinting techniques from a penetration standpoint. Looking at a lot of the compliance protections from a qualified security perspective, looking at kind of how these techniques from the penetration tester's methodologies and how he was able to gain access into the cardholder data environment. One of those is just looking at, how you're going about footprinting techniques. A lot of this information that penetration testers, as they're conducting their internal or external penetration tests, they're looking at a lot of public information out there on the internet. It could be LinkedIn, it could be information from Facebook, job postings, even the company website directly. So one of those things that you want to look at is making sure that the technology infrastructure, a lot of these components or tools the company is using, is not listed in the public domain. So you don't want to be listing out the companies using SQL, Oracle, like Amazon or Azure as an example, and just have it be generic. Comfortable with a database, enterprise database technologies or cloud security technologies and things like that, and just have it be very generic in nature. So that way it would help prevent, some of the guessing that a penetration tester would have to look at as far as compromising credentials and things like that. Also, one of the other things is taking a look at the hardening of systems. So you want to implement system hardening best practices, and you can utilize various other types of benchmark standards out there, such as the Center for Internet Security, the CIS benchmark standards, NIST, there's thousands of different hardening templates that are out there. So you want to make sure that you harden your systems, making sure that those controls, there's only the allowed ports and services enabled for conducting your general business processes. One of the other things that you also want to look at in just, how Daniel exploited these credentials. You also want to take a look at these password controls, making sure that passwords are masked and not stored in clear text. So looking at how you're going about controlling those password technologies, making sure that they're not being stored in those bash shell scripts or logs. In addition to that, multi-factor authentication, you want to be able to enforce this for all externally facing systems, as well as any systems that are accessed within the cardholder data environment. This is a PCI requirement as far as making sure that any of those administrative systems that people are accessing remotely from a computer or a laptop, whether it be even just accessing systems over the network, from even a VPN connection, you want to make sure you enforce multi-factor authentication for all systems that are accessed within the card data environment. Another compliance protection for target profiling is implementing security awareness training. So this really is looking at how you go about preventing social engineering and phishing attempts that could be commonly done as part of this footprinting exercise during the target profiling phase, and making sure that they're aware of what these types of attempts would be to be able to compromise any personally identifiable information. And next up, we have attack pretexting.
Thank you, Sheryl. So to give you a brief overview, attack pretexting is the practice of giving good context to your attacks themselves. It's not enough to just blindly send out a phishing attack or a social engineering phone call. You have to come up with a pretext for your attacks that takes your target off of guard, makes them more likely to engage with you, and really not try to raise any suspicions. I found that one of the most effective techniques is to just follow standard operating procedure, follow their daily routine. If you can try to make it seem more like everyday life, something that happens a million times a week, they won't think twice about it. There's also a stereotype of people coming in and trying to scare the users, but I actually found that I've had much more success trying to be likable with users rather than trying to scare them or stress them out. I think it just applies to life as a whole, where if you're likable and nice to people, they're much more likely to engage with you because they have more reason to do what you're asking. All right, so this next slide, actually it's not going over. Sorry about that. Here we go. So this next one is something that I've actually used a lot. So especially since COVID started, we found that a lot of our clients have been shifting more to remote work. So of course, MFA protections are much more commonplace now. I want to say that pre-COVID, maybe 10% of VPN portals and 20% of email services were not protected by MFA. But ever since, I'm going to say roughly June 2020, I don't think I've actually have seen any external portals that are no longer MFA protected. So it's so widespread now. But there are still ways to get around this control by exploiting human behavior. In this specific case, again, it was an external pen test conducted from the public internet. All of their corporate infrastructure, including VPN portals, email servers, were protected by MFA, but their MFA was configured to allow push notifications. So for those of you who are unaware, most MFA devices use codes. It might text you a code, or the app itself might show a code that you enter into the login portal. In contrast, push notifications simply send out a push to your phone, and you can just click accept or deny on the app itself to either accept or deny the MFA authentication attempt. The issue with this is that code-based MFA requires the user with a device to also be present at the computer logging in, whereas push notifications allows the two to be separate. So as an attacker, I could try to log in and send out a MFA push notification around 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning. The user will see it, and more often than not, they will assume that this is from them logging to work for the first time. I'm sure some of you have worked in corporations before where, especially since COVID, you log into work in the morning, you get the MFA push notification from you trying to VPN in for the first time. A lot of these users will get used to that over time, and they will like blindly accept the push notifications, allowing me in. Similarly, if I focus on noon to 1 p.m., users will assume that the push notifications are from the computer being idle and timing out during lunch, and that this is just from them coming back to lunch. Personally, normally I just look for users who allow push notifications only. If I find that the user only allowed SMS text, I won't even try logging into their account. And overall, I've been able to exploit this to access all sorts of things from their email to the internal network, VMware Horizon applications, their SSL portal hosting internal applications. And a lot of the time, I've been able to leverage this bypass of MFA into domain administrator access on their internal network and gain control over the entire corporate infrastructure. And this goes to show that even though MFA is a technically strong control, there are ways to bypass it without relying on technical attacks.
Okay, so based off of the attack pretexting overview, this is all generally based off of social engineering techniques, getting the trust from your target, whether it be user, looking at those MFA pushes and things like that, and just compromising some of those credentials from unknowing or unsuspecting users as well. Some of those protections that you can consider implementing across the board would be implementing policies and procedures, as well as looking at implementing multi-factor authentication across the board, and making sure that those users are aware from an information security awareness training standpoint is looking at, these social engineering attempts. And a lot of these are very common in nature with multi-factor authentication by having unsuspecting users click on those automated MFA pushes to their phone and automatically or just unknowingly accept those when they know that they might already be connected into their corporate network. Also, one of the other attack methodologies is looking at SMS smishing, is looking at those automated text messages, whether it be clicking on a link or something like that to say, yeah, I've authorized, there's an MFA push on your phone, you get an SMS text, you click on a link to authorize, accept or deny these transactions. You want to make sure that users are aware of these. If it's unknown activity, just inform these users not to click on those links and report those up to information security as the help desk processes. One of the other things that our pen testing team usually does is conducting these regularly tests on users and conducting these phishing campaigns. So you want to look at some other tools, looking at other tools such as like KnowBe4, and there's many different other tools that are out there pertaining to phishing exercises and different campaigns that you can conduct within your user community, making sure that they're aware of all these different attack methodologies. And I do see several questions that have been popped up in the queue. So we will hold on the questions until the end of our talk. Next up is our process caps.
All right, thank you. With any good security framework, with any good information security policy, there are a lot of processes in place that would try to mitigate risks from technical and user behavior. Some of the problem is that the best controls are only as effective as their implementation. You could create a control that states that users will have 16 character passwords, all random, no dictionary words. But again, it's only as good as their implementation. And oftentimes, some issues will slip through the cracks unnoticed in any sufficiently large or complex company. Some factors that affect the likelihood of this happening are how complex the organization is from both a size and I guess just internal technical complexity standpoint. Organization with say 5 or 6 subsidiaries, an Active Directory that were all kind of patched together are very likely going to have major issues there. Another issue would just be the technical and human resources available. Anecdotally, I once worked a client with extremely talented people and with great monitoring solutions in place, but they were so understaffed that I was able to compromise them undetected because there was no one physically there at the computer to notice the alerts as they were coming in. The audits on the effectiveness of policies generally would find these gaps, and organizations that don't conduct regular audits oftentimes will not know that these issues exist. And of course, just random technical quirks. Group policy is probably the biggest one. I've worked with multiple clients where they pushed out the right GPOs to fix an issue, but due to just quirks with Active Directory itself, these GPOs weren't always correctly applied and the issues persisted in some manner. Right. So for the case study, we're gonna wait for a slide, there we go. So the client in question was a very old organization that's been around for a while. We conducted an internal network pen test for them where we actually started off on the internal network itself. So with the client, because they were around for decades, there was organic turnover in the IT team throughout the years. You know, people left, people retired, and eventually the people who were there at the time were not the people who implemented these who implemented the technical stack originally. At the same time, a lot of security policies at the organization was implemented in the early 2010s. That's pretty common these days. And as a result, due to how old the Active Directory environment was and due to the lack of institutional knowledge, many domain administrators on the network hadn't had the password changed in 5 years, and a lot of people didn't notice. So during my pen test, I compromised a backup operator account. And for those of you who don't know, backup operators are local administrators on domain controllers specifically. And because of that, I was able to RDP into a domain controller. And this account in question didn't have a password. So one of the issues here was that even though the client had strong password policies in place, no one actually went back and ensured that the password policy was retroactively applied to all accounts. So a lot of these accounts, because never had the password changed in all this time, they were allowed to persist with these weak, or in this case, a blank password, because the password change would only be the password policy would only be enforced once the account's password was changed. So when I RDP'd in, I found a 3-year-old backup file of ntds.dit. And for those of you who don't know, ntds.dit is the file on all domain controllers that contain the password hashes for all domain users. So by compromising this file, you compromise the passwords or the password hashes of everyone on the Active Directory domain. In this case, because it was a backup file, the passwords in there were at least 3 years out of date. But going back a bit, since many domain administrators had not had their password changed in 5 years, a lot of the passwords for these privileged accounts were still valid. So I was able to take this old file, log in with these very stale passwords, and compromise the entire domain that way.
Great, Danielle. Thank you very much for that. It's a very unique client situation where in some cases, they may have another security firm taking a look at them and they've passed their PCI compliance year over year. Unknowingly, you've got all these gaps that we found. And looking at all these weak security controls that were exploited. And that's definitely a PCI compliance issue. Taking a look at those password controls and those password requirements. You know, you can't have weak passwords in a PCI environment. You can't have anything that's blank. You can't have you know, passwords that haven't been changed in a periodic time frame. Typically, you know, PCI requires at least passwords being changed at least every 90 days, if not more frequent. So it really kind of depends on how users implement these password controls and enforcing these industry security best practices. So you do want to make sure that your company is enforcing current password policies and procedures, and they do reflect the current password practices enforced. Looking at all of your systems, looking at domain controllers, looking at any of your applications and so forth that do support any cardholder data processing or any other systems that you do have. You want to make sure that those password controls do reflect your password policy. The other thing is taking a look at making sure that you do perform periodic compliance assessments or audits against your policies and procedures, as well as looking at your system configuration. So you do want to conduct looking at all of your security controls, performing those periodic audits against IT general controls within your environments. Next up is looking at the access control gaps, and this is always a very common framework, as one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Yes, it is. This is where I am probably most happiest. I like to joke that my security spirit animal is a raccoon because I am often the one deep diving through network shares and looking through files to help me compromise a network. So access control gaps in any environment, access control is the most basic security control there is. You know, you log into your account with a username and password, and you're only able to log in if you're allowed access to that computer in the first place. Same fundamental rules apply in pretty much all of security. You're only supposed to grant access to users who really do need to be there. One of the key issues is that good access controls hinges on people making the correct determination of what appropriate access actually entails. And the problem is that people don't always make the right choices. They might not know who requires access. They might not recognize excessive access when they see it, or due to technical issues, they might not be aware of excessive access permissions. And as I said earlier, these controls are only as effective as their implementation. And I have made a great living just exploiting organizations by finding useful data that a lot of organizations have overlooked or were not even aware it's there. In a recent pen test, I managed to compromise the entire internal network, and it started off with finding a single string in a .exe. I just ran the strings command and I found a password hard-coded in executable, and from there I compromised a privileged account. So some of the factors that affect access controls are proper risk evaluation, determining the risk and the potential impact of the current access permissions granted. The complexity of these access policies, similar to the GPO issues I mentioned earlier, oftentimes there might be conflicting permissions and one will unknowingly override the other. And visibility into hidden infrastructures, which I think I'll be going into soon. All right, yep. So in this case, I'm gonna talk about this really fun compromise I had. We were on an internal network pen test. I think this was actually within the CDE. We found a network share that was readable by any user containing developer environment logs. Oftentimes you'll find that the development environment logs or files within a development environment are readable by everyone, because oftentimes the passwords and the account credentials within development environments are completely different from the production environment. Similarly, the data within development environments are not live production data, so they would not contain any actual client or customer information. So as a result, a lot of developers let their guard down in development environments, and we see a lot of laxer security controls in place. So in this case, I was in the development environment. I found a network share that was readable by any authenticated user. And some of the files on these shares were logs for a SQL server. I pulled the SQL server logs, and I think it was around, I want to say 5,000 lines. And after reading through the lines manually, I think it took me like 20 or 30 minutes, I found one single line that had SQL Server credentials for an account. The database itself did not contain any sensitive information, and the account that I compromised in question was not an SA account, so it was not a database administrator. As a result, I didn't have write access to the database. I couldn't execute command line. I couldn't use XP command shell, which would let me execute commands on the Windows server. So my privileges were pretty limited. What I did have access to is a SQL Server or transaction SQL command called xbdirectory. This command is, to my knowledge, undocumented by Microsoft. I think it only really exists on forums. I couldn't find official documentation the last time I looked. And what this command does is it lets you list out all the files on a network share or on a folder or on a drive. So what an attacker like me can do is we can spin up poisoners that would poison any incoming SMB access to our machine. So by using my own laptop's IP address and by specifying a network share to xbdirectory, I can force the SQL Server service to try to access my laptop. My laptop would send a response back saying, hey, you need to authenticate into me. And that would force the account running the SQL Server instance to authenticate to my server, where I'm able to actually capture its password hash and try to crack it or relay it. In this specific case, the SQL Server instance was being run by a domain administrator account. So with this attack, I had actually managed to compromise the domain administrator itself. So from here, I relayed the domain administrator credentials into multiple servers to gain instant administrator access. And I was also able to perform offline dictionary attacks and obtain its clear text credentials as well. And again, compromise the entire internal network from just one line in some dev logs.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing just all the different ways that you can compromise all these access controls. So looking at this specific example of the case study that Daniel had utilized to exploit these weak and excessive access controls is taking a look at, compromising many different ways. And you can take that as, some of these, unsuspecting ways of using those development credentials and being able to pivot that information and pivot off and compromising that domain administrator account. So one of those things that you're looking at from a compliance standpoint on access controls is you want to protect and develop these access roles and responsibility matrices for the different job descriptions, job positions within your organization. You want to make sure that these assigned roles and permissions permit and allow appropriate separation of duties. So you want to make sure that there's no unnecessary roles and permissions that are assigned given users. So you don't want to have developers accessing the production environment. And the same way, as far as being able to promote code into production, you want to make sure there's appropriate separation of duties throughout the processes of permitting access to your environment. Also, looking at different ways that you can exploit access controls is looking at when users are setting up or getting set up new access within the corporate environment. You don't want to mirror another user's access rights or permissions. It could be excessive in nature. If you don't have those developed access roles and permissions that are set up, you can be giving access unknowingly, to this new hire that shouldn't have access to certain functions. So one of the other things is taking a look at the access control compliance measures is also performing periodic user access reviews. You do want to conduct those at least on a quarterly basis, making sure that all users have the appropriate level of access. And if there's any changes that need to be made across the board, you're following a defined process and help desk ticket process to actually go through, remove those access, or if things need to change, their job roles change, you're making sure that those changes are reflected accordingly as well. Also taking a look at terminated users access. You want to make sure that that access is removed in a timely manner. And it's not just network access. You also want to look at the system and applications that that user also had access to during their time of employment. And that's always one of those common areas to exploit. As far as access to a given application, whether it be Amazon or something access that they had in the cloud, you want to make sure that those accounts are also deprovisioned as well. And then in our closing thoughts, we just wanted to give you a few tips and tricks.
Okay, thank you. So from my perspective, from a technical perspective, I want to reiterate again that organizations are run by humans. And I feel like this is a very underappreciated point where the best technical defenses are ultimately planned, implemented, and controlled by people. I think have demonstrated that a lot of otherwise strong technical controls were made vulnerable by just decisions or behaviors from people themselves. So it showed that we were able to use human behavior to bypass MFA, to gain internal network access, and compromise internal network without initial privileged accounts. So from a blue team perspective, from a defensive perspective, you want to anticipate vulnerabilities from people. Try to think about what risks might be introduced by people making the wrong decisions, and then implementing processes to try to counter those vulnerabilities. Some suggestions I like to push to clients include regular audits of your organization's security, be it scans of your Active Directory relationships to ensure no improper permissions, to conducting regular password audits and forcing users with weak passwords that you found to change the passwords. Security education is always a huge one. It's probably the trickiest one for organizations to implement, but the more security aware your users are as a whole, the better you'll be as a result. From a professional perspective, you just always have to continue learning. Attacks and threats change every day. And I mean, within the past, I want to say 2 weeks, we've shifted from talking about and freaking out about SolarWinds to freaking out about on-prem Exchange servers. And overall, security is collaborative. Technical and process controls complement one another. Especially in my field, I feel like there's a very heavy overemphasis on technical controls without appreciating that a lot of the policies in place, a lot of the processes complement technical controls and work together to create a more secure organization. Similarly, understanding the human component in security can go a very long way in securing your organization, and performing regular risk assessments within your organization will help you understand where you are and give you ideas of how you can get to where you want to be.
Great points. And always just looking at the aspects from a technical standpoint, you must also have that compliance framework as well in mind when you're conducting your various assessments or looking at your security posture across your organization. Compliance is a requirement for most organizations that you both need to implement both that technical testing, from that pen testing standpoint, as well as compliance testing to make sure that your organizations are truly secure. Looking at these different compliance requirements, these organizations, you can face fines and penalties if you're not compliant with these different standards that are out there. Yeah, whether it be, PCI, DSS, whether it be HIPAA, GDPR, if you're a publicly traded organization, so forth, if you're not complying with SOX, there's so many different fines and penalties that could be issued out there by these different regulators, if not, the card brands, which would be issuing out your fines and penalties, that they push those onto the merchants directly, could, face your organization to being shut down from accepting credit cards and so forth. So there's just so many different ramifications there, not to mention if you get breached, goodness, there's so many other things that you have to deal with legal fines, penalties there, credit card protection services for customers who got breached and so forth. So that image reputation is so important from a compliance standpoint. You want to make sure that your systems are well secured. So looking at all these different best practices at a high level, just covering some of the high points here, is you want to develop and implement organizational-wide information security policies and procedures. And why I say this is you're looking at information security as a whole. You're looking at IT general controls. You're looking at all of those controls that would be able to protect an organization. Looking at operational controls, looking at systems development lifecycle, access controls, etc. And that's just a couple, just to name a few. Also, you want to look at the performance of your enterprise risk assessment. So there are many ways to conduct an enterprise risk assessment. This is both the enterprise-wide organization, including the administrative controls, physical security controls, your technical controls, so looking at the pen testing, other IT general controls within that environment. You also want to look at those organizational controls from a standpoint, whether it be business process controls and those things that relate to how an organization would be able to conduct business. You want to make sure that those controls are identified in your risk assessment. In addition, is looking at your policies and procedures safeguards. So looking at those kind of a few key points there as you're conducting that risk assessment based on those key factors, you're identifying within your risk assessment those human threats, those technical threats, environmental and physical threats, and natural threats. We've got COVID going on. Who knew that this would ever happen? And you want to make sure that you're accounting for pandemic within your enterprise risk assessment as well, that could potentially exist within your organization. Also, looking at the best practices, you want to implement all the necessary controls and compensating controls as necessary to protect your organization's assets. So looking at all those IT general controls that we've talked earlier during our talk. And if you're not able to meet some of these controls, what are those compensating controls that you can implement in addition to be able to monitor any of those actions that might occur, whether it be logging and monitoring, that you're going to implement some additional controls on top of that. Say, for example, you can't implement a password control because you've got a 15-year-old application that doesn't support multi-factor authentication. You want to implement other measures in place to monitor those accounts being logged in. Also performing continuous audit techniques. Continuous audit is very, very important. You want to go through and conduct these regular assessments and audits of your organization's security posture. You want to conduct these at least on an annual basis, if not more frequently. And it's okay to periodically perform a test or two tests of different, let's say this month I'm going to start with physical security controls. Let's take a look at that control area at first, and then look at and just do spot checks of these, and you can conduct what we call a gap assessment. If you want to do one general gap assessment across all IT general controls and just conduct, let's take a sample of one system here, one system there, and just see if organizations are following their policies and practices. And that will give you a sense if there's some control breakdowns and if you need to conduct any additional remediation efforts to make sure that companies are aware that they need to follow their security policies. Next is looking at your security awareness training. And this is very, very important. There are so many ways that you can conduct security awareness training, but you want to make sure it's effective. So that security training, it's not just protecting the assets of the organization. You want to make sure you're giving these examples, like we've talked about with social engineering, phishing, smishing, etc. You want to make sure that organizations are aware of these different ways of techniques that people unknowingly might suspectly give out personally identifiable information, causing these data breaches, causing these hacks, and so forth within the organization. You also want to be aware that, that users are aware of all of the information security policies and procedures, and these requirements that they are required to adhere to them. So, a lot of these compliance measures, they require that users abide by and adhere to the policies and procedures. So they must electronically sign or physically sign on the policies and procedures upon hire. So we're going through and testing these PCI requirements or other compliance requirements that do require adherence to policies. So if we know that they're not following these policies and procedures, we know that there's a control gap, that we need to make sure that users are educated on these new changes that are going on within the organization. Also, looking at the continuous audit techniques, you also want to conduct these technical reviews and perform at a minimum an annual penetration test against these environments. And it could be black box, gray box, it could be white box. So looking at these different techniques, you want to make sure that you're conducting these penetration tests at least annually, if not more frequently. In some cases, some other regulations do require segmentation testing at least every 6 months for service providers. So there's different ways that you can conduct these. A lot of organizations, they might even conduct these more frequently, a quarterly basis. You know, they might have had issues in the past that they want additional level of comfort that their systems are secure more frequently. And with that, we will kind of close out our talk here and pull up our questions and answers queue here to be able to go through these questions here. Yep. Bear with me while I look at some of these questions.
It's like the first one's for me. Oops, I think I got it. So have you ever found a pattern in what type of role or level of seniority fall for fishes? As far as roles goes, I found that, again, developers are my preferred target because great intersection of privileged access with lack security controls. As far as seniority, I found it's a bimodal curve on either end, where the most susceptible tend to be the most senior people, usually executives at the C-suites, or the newest people who may not be aware of the normal procedure and policies in place. Personally, I actually tend to focus on the newer people because even though the executives might have more privileged access, you are going to set off a much stronger IR response if one of them reports your fishes. And I found that newer people tend to be, they tend to second guess themselves if they should report it or not. And because of that, I'd like to focus on a lot of the newer people. Like the second question is for Sheryl, and I read it aloud.
Yep.
Sheryl, what's the most common problem you encounter when reviewing how a client has segmented their CDE?
That's a difficult question. A lot of common issues when we're looking at segmentation and how clients have segmented their CDE. One of those critical components that we look at is looking at those firewall rule sets within the cardholder data environment. And we're looking at appropriate level of segmentation across their DMZ. So we're primarily focused in on looking at those inbound connections into the cardholder data environment and making sure that limited ports and services are allowed within, that there's no insecure ports and services that would compromise the CDE. We're looking at a lot of those different controls pertaining to the technologies that might be implemented, whether it be cloud security. We're looking at VPC peering. We're looking at other microsegmentation controls that might have been implemented as well to make sure that people have implemented segmentation from their what we call their cardholder data environment from the rest of their corporate network. You want to be sure that those systems and technologies are segmented from each other. Within the environment. And then also, of course, implementing multi-factor authentication within the CDE. So one of those things is we just see improper configurations within these segmentation controls as well. So that's one of the most common issues that we see.
All right, I think the next question is also for you, Sheryl. Are there any controls that you frequently get a lot of pushback from clients?
I don't really have a lot of pushback, I would say, from clients. What we do get a lot of questions on is pertaining to a lot of these segmentation controls. A lot of companies get very confused on understanding what is a cardholder data environment, what does that mean? What are those systems that are kind of be considered as part of the CDE, and what is what we call a connected to system. So a lot of these connected to systems are those segments or subnets that have a connection inbound into that environment. And it could be Active Directory that is providing a port allowed over, if you're doing SSH, as an example, that port or service allowing that connection inbound from another system or server, that would be a connected to system. So you're looking at those different kinds of controls and just kind of we're looking at how that network path, how data is being flowed across the network. And we ended up, scoping in a lot more systems than the client would potentially expect to see that they're not aware of in most cases. And then also looking at security impacting systems, those security controls are looking at FIM and SIM as well. And those systems do get accounted into scope for security impacting systems. And then it looks like we've got another question here for Daniel, kind of onto that question. How would the lack of those controls affect your ability to compromise network security or network and information, et cetera?
It just makes life a lot easier for me, honestly. But the issue I feel is that it doesn't provide as much value for clients. When clients have these networks wide open, there's only so much that you can actually do. Or there's only so much that you can actually write about that they could actually implement. So, if they don't have a strong password policy, then you can, all your talk about 80 group permissions or about ask rep roasting suddenly becomes moot. Goes back to crawl, walk, run. You got to do the basics first. And if they don't have these controls implemented, that's where they should be starting. And to be honest, I think a lot of the times people who don't have these controls in place aren't yet ready for a pen test. I think I have one more, but we might be long on time.
So Celeste, do we have a couple minutes just to cover this last question here?
I think unfortunately we'll probably have to cut it. I'll just kind of wrap things up for that specific question.
It should take me just 1 second to answer that question, but
okay, sure.
pertaining
No
to the engagements, how do I find the client has little to no understanding of PCI compliance and how do I handle it? I find this very common within our organizations when we're doing assessing of PCI compliance for organizations. So what we do typically is we conduct a kickoff meeting with the client, get an understanding of their understanding of compliance itself. And we do conduct what we call a PCI 101, an introduction to PCI compliance. And we give them the understanding of what it means, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish as far as the compliance efforts are concerned, and give them that overview so they understand what we're here to do, assessing their environment and making sure that they're secure and compliant.